this episode of M&E Labs, a platform where we discuss some of the basic concepts related to monitoring and evaluation analysis for beginners. So today I'm going to deal with a subject which seems to be relatively easy, but that's not really easy. Today I'm going to talk about how to develop a structured questionnaire and three important qualities of a structured questionnaire. So today we are dealing with three important qualities of structured questionnaires. First of all, let me tell you, constructing a questionnaire or developing a questionnaire is both science and art. So you have to have that understanding of the science of the tool development and the art of how to construct it, right? So the first very important quality that a structured questionnaire must have is it should be respondent-friendly. It should be respondent-friendly. I assume you understand what a respondent is. A respondent is the person who responds to the questionnaires that we administer to them. So the questionnaires, the structured questionnaire that we develop, the structure that we follow, the questions that we ask must be developed in such a way so that it is friendly to the respondent. The very first important thing when you are considering the from the friendliness of the respondent point of view, the first thing is that you have to keep it simply worded. The language that we use must be simple. We should not be throwing our evaluation jargons. For example, we are doing a program evaluation of an intervention where we are wanting, the objective is to understand whether the program has been effective enough in terms of passing the benefits to the beneficiaries. Now, when we go and ask a respondent, have you received the benefits of the program? Do you think this is the right way to ask? We understand what are the benefits of the program, what the program entailed, what was its LFA, what components were there under the program, what it aimed to achieve, and so on and so forth. But my respondent doesn't understand these things. We have to write it in a very simple manner, right? For instance, what was your, what is your, main source of livelihood? Have you received any financial support from any of the department or NGO or any other intervention? Or maybe did the your panchayat or the local government support you in doing something, and so on and so forth. It has to be written in a very simple manner which the respondent will be able to understand. Otherwise what will happen is that if we write all these technical terms in our questionnaire, the respondent tends to not to say no, I don't understand. Because he thinks that if I say that I don't understand, or if I express my inability to respond to this question, he'll feel shy about it. So he'll say something, and the investigator will record something. So we have to understand that where do we use the structured questionnaire? We use the structured questionnaire when under your quantitative component of your study, where you are covering like 5,000, 10,000, 20,000 samples. So mind it, these questionnaires are administered by a group of field workers whom you train. You are not doing it. So therefore, even you may be able to understand that perhaps the respondent is not understanding it, but mind you, the investigator whom you have trained for 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, 5 days or whatever, he will not be able to have that intelligence in terms of understanding whether my respondent has understood my question or not. So therefore, as a researcher, as the evaluator, it is your role, it is our role to write it in a very simple manner, so that the respondent understands it just by reading it out. So that's for example, empowerment, woman empowerment. We should not be writing, do you think you're empowered? No, that's not the right way of asking it. There are so many modules, etc., where you put a series of questions or variables to actually arrive to that particular objective of empowerment. So we have to be very careful that we have to have very simply worded questions that we ask in the questionnaire. Look, important is that we have to have the ethical considerations. So ethical considerations. By this we mean we have to very clearly specify how to introduce, how the investigator is supposed to introduce himself or herself when he is conducting the interview, how to take the consent from the respondent, because you are taking, we have to understand that when our team is going to the field, they are not giving anything to the respondent, right? We are taking something from the respondent, information, their valuable time. So therefore, we must be respectful about it, right? So we have to have the ethical considerations. The introduction must be polite, must be clear, must be straight. The consent must be taken, and only if the respondent is consenting, then only the interviews must be completed. So these are one or two things which one has to be really careful about when you are developing your questionnaire. There are other things also which one can always ponder, think, and then take care of. Then the next thing that we have to be careful about is that the second important quality is that it has to be investigator friendly. Investigator friendly. By this we mean like I said just now, we don't go and administer the questionnaires. There is a group of field workers, the investigators, who are actually mandated to go and collect the data from the field. So the instructions must be very, very clear. Where to skip, which question is to be asked, which question is not to be asked to a particular set of respondent. If one of the responses, if in some of the variables the response is, let's say, no, and the next question was supposed to be asked only if the response was yes in the previous question, so that has to be very, very clearly mentioned, explained when you are developing your question. So skip patterns to be very clearly explained, the codes, etc. So when we develop a structured questionnaire, we must try to pre-code most of the questions, most of the variables, and not leave it on our investigator to write an open-ended response and then you postcode it, because practically people don't write it. So as much as possible, as researchers, as evaluators, we should do our homework well, right? So that's why I said this is a science. So the science is that you have to read the project that for which you are conducting your evaluation. Try to get as many information as you can for a particular question, and then write the codes as much as possible, right? So try to code it, specify very clearly whether this is a single response or a multiple response. You write it there in front of the question that this is a single response question, this is a multiple response question, right? So for example, you wanted the most important let's say a reason why some of the members of the household is not using the toilet, and then you write all your options there and you leave it on to your investigator. So the respondent doesn't know that you want a single coded response here. You want the most important response why some of the members of the household are not using the toilet. They will just give you 2, 3, 4 responses because that's their habit. It's not clean. The elderly people feel more comfortable going for open defecation and so on and so forth. The investigator will very happily just code all those responses. Now, when you sit and look at the data, you break your head. Okay, what to do now? Which is the most important one, right? So these instructions, like whether there's a single response or a multiple response, has to be very, very clearly specified in front of your question so that there's absolutely no ambiguity about it, right? Now, the third important quality that our structured questionnaire must have is it has to be analysis friendly. Analysis friendly. Now, what do you mean by this? See, in the end of the day, data is collected wonderfully, the sample has been achieved, but if it is not in the usable format, then your life is a mess. Okay, you break your head, you wake up in the middle of the night scratching your head, what to do now? Okay, so to avoid it, the art thing here. Okay, so how do I structure my questionnaire in such a way so that when I'm doing the analysis, I have my responses, right? So it is always best to have the analysis plan listed down first. Okay, and basis that only you write your questions or your variables. Okay, and the options to those variables. So very important thing that I usually find people not paying a lot of attention is that you must have the unique ID, right? So for instance, if you're collecting 5,000 samples in 10 states, in different districts, different villages, if you don't have a unique ID, you are in a problem, you are in a mess. Okay, because after the data comes in, it undergoes processing, it undergoes cleaning, and then the classification data is somewhere else, the demographic data is something, and it will become a great mess. Okay, so it is always, nowadays people use CAPI, computer aided personal interview methods. So there the application of the system itself generates unique ID, but still it is, if it is not, if you are using a pen and paper method, so then it is very important that you define your unique ID, all those combinations that you use in the unique ID. So every case has to be assigned a unique ID. That's very important. Yeah. And so like I said, before writing your variables and finalizing your questionnaire, you have to have your analysis plan in hand, right? So for example, if you wanted to do a multivariate analysis by the economic category of the household, right? So you make sure that you have that particular variable, okay, or set of variables, right? So either you have his or her BPL status, or monthly household income, or expenditure, whichever way you want. Okay, monthly household incomes, we all know it's generally underreported, and expenses are generally overreported, right? So best is to either get a set of variables so that you calculate the person's wealth categories into 2-3 by using percentile method or whatever. So we must have all those basic data, and then you have all those classification data. Okay, because tomorrow if I want to see how is a particular variable behaving by social groups, how is a variable behaving by gender, how is a particular variable behaving by educational status. So we need to have those variables, right? You have to ask those questions, and then only in one of the studies I remember we forgot asking the gender of the respondent, and we wanted to do an analysis by gender that was on financial inclusion, and then it was like a big mess. We tried to match it with the names, and so many things had to be done. So these things are really very important. One more thing is that if you a common mistake that I see is when you are asking the let's say educational qualification, so we generally put it into class intervals up to 5, up to primary, secondary, higher secondary, and so on and so forth. Now if your analysis plan was to see the, let's say I'm just giving one random thing, okay, you wanted to do a regression where your dependent variable was let's say expenditure by educational qualification, and you have not kept it in a form of continuous variable, right? Your educational qualification, you have put it into class interval, so there you're in a problem, right? So the type of variable, whether that's a continuous or a categorical, all those things have to be, you have to be very careful about, okay? Type of variables, whether continuous or categorical or whatever, yeah. So I think these are the 3 important things if one is cognizant of and takes care of. Mostly the first draft of the questionnaire, structured questionnaire that you develop will be generally 70-75% all right. So I think these tips will be useful for you when you develop your next questionnaire, and I'll be happy to also have your comments if you want to give some examples, etc., in these 3 important qualities, or if you also think that probably there is one more quality that is really important to have in a structured questionnaire, I'll be happy to see that. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I'm hopeful that you are getting you get benefit out of this. Thank you very much.